Ethan Carter crouched beside the broken foundation, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His flashlight flickered against the cold stone, illuminating a narrow gap beneath the structure. From inside, a weak whimper echoed, a sound so faint he might have missed it had he not been listening so intently. His heart pounded. There it was. A small, trembling shape curled in the darkness. A puppy. The little creature's eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else in them, something unexpected. A fragile trust. A silent plea for help. Ethan swallowed hard. He had been following the mother for over an hour, led by her unwavering determination. She had appeared at his window every morning for days, scratching at the glass, pacing anxiously, her golden brown fur streaked with dirt. He had known she was trying to tell him something. And now he understood. Behind him, the mother dog stood tense, her ears flicking forward. She didn't growl or bark, just watched, waiting. It was as if she knew he was her only hope. Ethan grabbed his phone with shaky fingers. "Sarah, I found it," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "The puppy is trapped under an old house. It looks weak, maybe injured. I don't know how long it's been here." The line crackled before Sarah Monroe's steady voice responded. "Stay put. I'm on my way." The puppy whimpered again, shifting slightly, and Ethan clenched his jaw. "Hold on, little guy. Help is coming." 2 weeks earlier, the morning mist curled around the treetops, casting a soft silver glow over the Carter residence. Ethan stood by the large glass window, sipping his coffee as the world outside slowly came to life. The thick forest beyond the backyard stretched for miles, untouched and wild, a stark contrast to the life he and Rachel had left behind in Chicago. This was their fresh start. He had spent years capturing the raw beauty of nature through his camera lens, traveling to remote locations for the perfect shot. But lately, something had shifted inside him. The relentless pace, the endless deadlines, it had drained him. So when the opportunity arose to move to this quiet countryside and take on independent projects, he had seized it. Rachel, on the other hand, had embraced the change cautiously. As a veterinarian, she loved animals, but she also valued stability. Trading a well-equipped city clinic for a small-town practice had been a leap of faith. Still, she had agreed, and now, as they settled into their new life, Ethan sensed that she, too, was starting to feel at home. A flicker of movement caught his eye. At first, it was just a shadow at the tree line, shifting through the undergrowth. Then, from the mist, a lone dog emerged. Ethan frowned. It was medium-sized, lean, with a coat of golden brown fur that clung to its frame. It wasn't wearing a collar. Stray dogs weren't common in this area, but something about this one made him pause. The dog stood there, staring at him through the window, ears slightly pulled back. There was no aggression in its stance, only a quiet intensity, as if it was studying him just as closely as he was studying it. Then, it lifted a paw and pressed it against the ground. Once. Twice. Ethan's grip on his coffee cup tightened. It almost looked deliberate. Before he could react, the dog turned and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the fog. Rachel's voice floated in from the kitchen. "Something interesting out there?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, a dog. It was just standing there, watching me." Rachel appeared in the doorway, a curious look on her face. "A stray?" "Maybe," he said slowly. "Or maybe it's trying to tell me something." She laughed lightly. "You're reading too much into it. It's probably just hungry." Ethan wasn't so sure. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about the dog. Over the next few days, it returned, always at the same time in the early morning, always standing in the same spot. It never barked, never approached too close, but it kept watching him. And then there was that strange pawing gesture. It wasn't random scratching or digging. It was deliberate, like it was trying to communicate. Rachel remained skeptical. It's probably just looking for food. Maybe someone abandoned it. But Ethan wasn't convinced. He had seen enough wildlife behavior to recognize when an animal was acting outside its instincts. Strays usually scavenged, sniffed around, showed hesitation or curiosity. This dog had a purpose. One morning, he decided to test a theory. Instead of just observing, he slowly stepped outside, keeping his movements calm. The crisp autumn air bit at his skin as he approached the edge of the porch. The dog stood there as usual, its amber eyes locked onto his. Ethan crouched and extended a hand, palm up, not too close but enough to invite trust. The dog didn't flinch or growl, it simply lowered its head and took a step back. Not in fear, but in expectation. As if it was waiting for him to follow. Rachel watched from the door, arms crossed. "Be careful. You don't know if it's aggressive." Ethan nodded, but didn't look away from the animal. He took a slow step forward. The dog mirrored him, retreating further into the trees, but never running. It was leading him. His pulse quickened. "I think it wants me to go somewhere." Rachel groaned. "Ethan, this isn't a movie. It's just a dog." He turned to her, his expression firm. "Then why does it keep coming back? Why does it do the same thing every time?" She hesitated, but didn't argue further. He turned back, but the dog was gone, melted into the forest once again. That night, Ethan reviewed the footage from his camera. He had started recording the visits, hoping to find a pattern. He replayed the morning's interaction frame by frame. And then he noticed something in the dog's body language, a subtle urgency. It wasn't just lingering out of curiosity. It was pleading. The next morning, as the first light broke through the mist, Ethan was already outside waiting. Right on time, the dog appeared. This time, when it turned and stepped back toward the forest, Ethan followed. Ethan stepped carefully over the tangled undergrowth, keeping his eyes on the dog ahead. The early morning light filtered through the canopy, casting shifting patterns across the forest floor. His breath came in slow, measured exhales as he followed. The dog moved deliberately, not running, not hesitating. It wanted him to follow. For nearly 10 minutes, the only sounds were the rustling leaves beneath his boots, and the occasional snap of a twig. The dog glanced back at him once in a while, ears twitching, as if making sure he was still there. Ethan's instincts screamed that this wasn't normal stray behavior. There was intelligence in those amber eyes. Purpose. Rachel was going to kill him when she found out he had wandered into the woods after a strange dog with no backup. But something about this felt important. The trees grew denser as they descended a shallow slope. Ethan ducked under a low-hanging branch, his camera bag bouncing slightly against his back. Just as he was about to call out, the dog abruptly stopped and froze. The dog stood at the edge of a clearing, its body tense. Its ears were pricked forward, tail low but not tucked. It took a few steps to the side, pawing at the ground again, that same motion it had been doing for days. Ethan's pulse quickened. Slowly, he stepped forward. The damp earth gave way beneath his boots as he entered the clearing. And then he saw it. A structure small, weathered, half hidden by the overgrowth. It looked like an old hunting cabin, long abandoned. The wooden walls were cracked, the roof sagging in places, but it still stood. A faint scent of damp wood and decay filled the air. Ethan turned to the dog. "Is this it?" he muttered, half to himself. The dog didn't move, only stared at him, unblinking. He approached cautiously, his fingers tightening around the camera strap slung over his shoulder. Something about this place made his skin prickle. It wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The dog suddenly whined, stepping toward the cabin's foundation. It lowered its head, sniffing at a gap between the stones. And then a sound. Faint. Weak. A whimper. Ethan's breath caught. There was something inside. Ethan crouched near the foundation, pressing his ear closer to the gap between the stones. The whimpering was faint but unmistakable. Someone was trapped inside. He swallowed hard, glancing at the dog, whose entire body remained tense, eyes locked on him as if urging him to act. He grabbed his phone and quickly turned on the flashlight, angling it toward the opening. Dust and cobwebs clung to the jagged stones, but beyond them, something small trembled in the darkness. His pulse quickened. It was a puppy. It was curled up, its golden brown fur barely visible in the dim light. Its breathing was shallow, its ribs pressing against thin skin with each fragile inhale. One of its legs was awkwardly tucked under its body, and Ethan's gut twisted at the sight. It was hurt. Badly. The mother dog let out a low whine, pacing near the entrance but never leaving. She had been trying to get help, and she had chosen him. His mind raced. The gap between the stones was too small to reach through, and the entire foundation looked unstable. He needed to find another way in. He stood, scanning the cabin structure. Most of the walls were intact, but the door had partially collapsed, leaving a narrow opening at the side. He tested the wood with his hand rotting but not entirely useless. He could break through. Ethan turned back to the dog. "I'm getting your pup out," he murmured, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. He pulled off his camera bag, setting it aside, and grabbed his phone. Rachel would definitely kill him for this, but he needed backup. He quickly dialed Sarah Monroe, the only wildlife expert he knew in the area. She picked up on the second ring. "Ethan? It's early. What's going on?" "I need your help," he said quickly. "I found a puppy trapped under an old cabin. It's weak, probably injured. The mother led me here. She's been trying to get my attention for days." A brief silence. Then Sarah's tone sharpened. "Where are you?" Ethan glanced around, estimating his location. "About a mile west of my house, near the old fire road. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't move the pup yet. Distressed animals can be unpredictable." "Understood." He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. Then he turned toward the entrance and pushed. The wood groaned, but didn't give way immediately. He braced his shoulder against it, applied more force, and with a sharp crack, the brittle wood snapped open. Dust and debris swirled into the air as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. The puppy let out another soft whimper. Ethan lowered himself to the ground, crawling toward the foundation gap. His hands trembled slightly as he reached forward. The tiny body flinched at his touch, but there was no strength left for resistance. Carefully, gently, he lifted the pup into his arms. The moment he turned, the mother dog stepped forward. She sniffed at her pup, nudging its face, whining softly. Ethan held his breath. Then, as if reassured, she looked up at him. And for the first time, he realized she trusted him. Ethan cradled the tiny, trembling body in his arms, feeling the shallow rise and fall of its breath against his chest. The puppy was barely conscious, its fur matted with dirt, one hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. He knew it didn't have much time. The mother dog hovered close, her amber eyes darting between him and her pup, torn between fear and trust. Ethan could feel the weight of her silent plea pressing against him like a tangible force. The old wood beneath his feet creaked as he carefully maneuvered out of the crumbling cabin, mindful of the jagged edges that threatened to snag at his clothes. Outside, the morning mist had begun to dissipate, but the chill still lingered in the air. He adjusted his grip on the fragile creature, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Where the hell was Sarah? Every passing second felt like an eternity. A rustling sound in the distance made him turn sharply. Relief flooded through him as Sarah Monroe emerged from the trees, her bag slung over one shoulder, eyes immediately locking onto the scene before her. She didn't waste a second. "How bad?" she asked, already kneeling to inspect the pup. Ethan carefully transferred the small bundle into her hands. Weak, dehydrated, leg might be broken. The mother brought me here. She's been trying to get my attention for days. Sarah's gaze flicked to the mother dog, who stood watching, tail low, ears flicking anxiously. That's incredible. She must have recognized you as a safe option. Ethan wasn't sure if it was incredible or terrifying. The idea that this wild animal had placed her trust in him so completely sent a shiver down his spine. Sarah worked quickly, her hands practiced and efficient. She checked the pup's breathing, gently probed its leg, then reached into her bag for a small syringe. I'm giving it a mild painkiller and some fluids. We need to get it to the center now. Ethan glanced at the mother dog, who had taken a cautious step forward, her nose twitching as she sniffed at Sarah's movements. What about her? She won't just let us take her pup. Sarah hesitated. We need to be careful. If she panics, she could turn defensive. But from what you've told me, she already sees you as part of this process. She unzipped another compartment in her bag and pulled out a collapsible crate lined with a soft blanket. We'll place the pup inside. If she follows willingly, we'll bring them both. Ethan exhaled slowly, crouching down and speaking in a low, soothing voice. We're helping, I promise. The mother dog didn't move immediately, but her muscles remained relaxed. When Ethan gently set the puppy inside the crate, she took another step closer, her body tense but not aggressive. And then, to his utter disbelief, she lay down beside the crate, placing one paw over the edge, as if refusing to be separated. Ethan held his breath as the mother dog settled beside the crate, her body pressed close as if to reassure the pup that she wasn't leaving. Sarah shot him a glance, her expression a mix of awe and urgency. We can't risk startling her. If she bolts, she might not come back, and we can't take the puppy without her. Ethan nodded, his muscles tense as he slowly reached for the crate's handle. The moment he lifted it, the mother dog's ears flicked forward. Her amber eyes locked onto him, but she didn't move away. He took that as a good sign. Moving with deliberate care, he rose to his feet, holding the crate close to his chest. Sarah stayed close, speaking in calm, measured tones. Come on, girl. We're helping your baby. Stay with us. The mother dog hesitated for a fraction of a second before standing, her movements slow but decisive. Ethan barely contained his relief as she fell into step beside them. The walk back to the clearing felt longer than it should have, every snap of a twig beneath their feet sending a spike of anxiety through Ethan's chest. He kept glancing down, half expecting the mother to change her mind, to suddenly decide that trusting humans had been a mistake. But she never wavered. She stayed close, ears flicking at every sound, eyes darting between him and the crate, as if making sure he was keeping his promise. When they reached the truck, Sarah moved first, opening the back and arranging a space lined with blankets. Ethan carefully placed the crate inside while the mother dog watched. Then came the real test. Sarah stepped back, leaving space. Ethan met the mother's gaze. It's okay, he murmured. You're coming too. For a moment, the air between them felt electric, charged with silent understanding. Then, to Ethan's astonishment, the mother dog jumped into the truck on her own. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. That's remarkable. Ethan barely heard her. He was too busy processing what had just happened. He shut the door, heart pounding. They had done it. But the battle wasn't over yet. As Sarah slid into the driver's seat and Ethan settled in beside her, he stole one last glance at the back. The mother dog had curled up beside the crate, her nose pressed against the side, watching over her pup. Sarah started the engine, her voice calm but urgent. Now let's make sure we didn't come all this way, just to be too late. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, every bump sending a jolt through Ethan's nerves. He kept glancing into the back, watching the mother dog. She hadn't moved much since they left the forest, her body curled protectively around the crate. Even now, she kept her nose pressed close, a silent guardian ensuring her pup was still there. The urgency in her eyes had softened slightly, but the exhaustion was evident. She had spent days trying to get help, and now that she had it, the weight of it all seemed to press down on her. Ethan understood that feeling all too well. Sarah drove with practiced efficiency, her gaze flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. We'll get them both checked as soon as we arrive. The pup's in rough shape, but if we're lucky, dehydration and a broken leg are the worst of it. The mother's a wild card, though. If she gets too stressed, she might refuse treatment or try to escape. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. She trusted me enough to lead me there. Maybe that'll be enough to keep her calm. Sarah didn't argue, but the doubt in her expression was clear. Wild animals followed instinct, and trust could be fleeting. When they pulled into the Wildlife Rescue Center, Ethan was already unbuckling his seatbelt before the truck came to a full stop. Sarah hopped out, moving quickly to the back while two other volunteers rushed over. Ethan opened the door carefully, expecting resistance, but the mother dog didn't react aggressively. She lifted her head, ears twitching, but she didn't growl or back away. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good. She's alert but not panicking. Let's move fast. One volunteer, a young woman named Claire, carefully lifted the crate with the pup inside and carried it toward the exam room. Ethan hesitated, but Sarah motioned for him to follow. She needs to see where we're taking her pup, she murmured. It'll help keep her calm. Ethan moved alongside the mother dog, speaking in a low voice. Come on, girl. You've come this far. To his relief, the mother followed without hesitation. As they entered the brightly lit clinic, the pup was already being placed on a padded table. A veterinarian, Dr. Langley, examined it with gentle hands, murmuring quick instructions to the team. Ethan's chest tightened as he took in the pup's frail body. It was too still, its breathing barely visible. He clenched his fists. They had to save it. Ethan stood at the edge of the room, watching as Dr. Langley and her team worked quickly. The pup barely moved as they checked its vitals, administered fluids, and carefully examined its injured leg. Every second that passed felt agonizingly slow, but Ethan forced himself to stay still, knowing he couldn't do anything more than hope. The mother dog paced nearby, her eyes darting between the veterinarians and the crate. She wasn't growling or trying to intervene, but the tension in her body was clear. She was waiting, just like Ethan. Dr. Langley finally straightened, letting out a breath. Dehydrated, malnourished, and the leg is definitely broken, but it's not as bad as it could have been. With proper care, it should heal. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. And the mother? Sarah stepped forward. She needs to be examined too. She looks exhausted, but I don't see any obvious injuries. Dr. Langley nodded, her tone cautious. We'll have to sedate her briefly to run tests. It's safer for everyone that way. Ethan's gut tightened. He knew it was necessary, but the idea of forcing the mother dog into unconsciousness after everything she had been through felt wrong. He glanced at her. She was still standing close to the table, watching everything unfold. She trusted them. That was the only reason she hadn't run. If they broke that trust now, would she ever forgive them? He took a slow step closer, speaking softly. Let me try first. Sarah hesitated, but gave him a nod. Ethan crouched, extending a hand. The mother dog's ears flicked, but she didn't move away. He kept his voice low, steady. You've done everything you could. Let them help now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to his amazement, she stepped forward. Slowly, cautiously, she let him place a gentle hand on her side. Dr. Langley gave him an approving look. If she stays calm, we can do this without sedation. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The team checked her over, cleaning a few scratches and drawing blood for tests. She remained tense but never fought back. She understood. Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about saving a stray. This was something bigger. As he watched the mother nuzzle her pup, exhaustion finally overtaking her, he realized she had placed her entire faith in him. And somehow, he knew he could never let her down. The following weeks passed in a blur of careful recovery. The pup, now affectionately named Scout, responded well to treatment. Its tiny body slowly regained strength, its once dull eyes now bright with curiosity. The broken leg required a small brace, but Dr. Langley was confident it would heal completely. The mother dog, whom Sarah had started calling Sage, never left Scout's side. She watched every procedure, every feeding, every moment of care with quiet vigilance. Ethan visited daily, sometimes staying for hours just sitting near them. At first, Sage had remained guarded, keeping a watchful distance, but little by little, she began to relax around him. One evening, as he sat cross-legged near their enclosure, she finally did something that took his breath away. She walked over, hesitated for just a moment, and then pressed her head against his knee. It was brief, fleeting, but in that moment, Ethan knew he had earned something rare and profound. Sarah noticed the change, offering him a small smile. "She trusts you." "Completely." Ethan ran a hand over his face, exhaling. "I don't know what I expected when this started. But I didn't expect this." Sarah nodded toward Scout, who was busy gnawing on a soft chew toy. "You saved her pup. That kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed." The words settled deep in Ethan's chest. It wasn't just about the rescue anymore. It was about the connection, the understanding that had grown between them. And soon, it would be time to let them go. 2 months after that morning in the woods, Sarah called Ethan with the news he had been both anticipating and dreading. "Scout's leg is fully healed. We're ready to release them." Ethan gripped his phone, swallowing hard. "Where?" "The same place you found them. It's their home." The drive back to the forest felt surreal. As Ethan followed Sarah's truck, his thoughts raced. He knew this was the right thing. Sage and Scout belonged in the wild. They weren't pets. They weren't meant to stay behind fences. But even knowing that, letting go wouldn't be easy. When they arrived at the clearing, Ethan helped unload the transport crates. The forest felt different now, more familiar, as if the trees themselves recognized their return. Sarah unlatched Sage's crate first. The mother dog hesitated for only a second before stepping out, her nose lifting to test the air. Then, she turned to Scout's crate. Ethan knelt down and opened it, his heart pounding. The pup hesitated, blinking at the sudden brightness. And then, with a joyful bound, Scout rushed toward Sage, pressing against her side. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. This was how it was meant to be. Ethan remained still, watching as Sage gave Scout a quick lick behind the ear before turning toward the dense trees ahead. She took a few slow steps, glancing back only once, ensuring that her pup was following. Scout hesitated, his small frame quivering with uncertainty, before bounding after her, his newly healed leg barely slowing him down. The two figures moved in perfect harmony, mother and child, their golden brown coats blending into the earthy hues of the forest. Ethan felt an ache in his chest, pride, relief, and something else he couldn't quite name. Sarah stood beside him, arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face. "This is the best outcome we could have hoped for." Ethan nodded, but his eyes remained on the retreating figures. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Sarah gave him a knowing smile. "They've already proven they're survivors. And besides, Sage has lived out here her whole life. She knows how to take care of her own." Ethan let out a slow breath, forcing himself to accept that truth. This was their home. Not the clinic, not the fenced-in sanctuary, but here wild, free, exactly as they were meant to be. As they packed up the empty crates, Ethan hesitated one last time, turning back to the forest. The trees stood silent, but he knew they were out there, watching. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, he might see them again, a flash of golden fur in the underbrush, a familiar pair of amber eyes peering through the trees. And if that day ever came, he would know that what he had done had mattered. Back at home, Ethan stood by his kitchen window, just as he had that first morning when Sage had appeared. The forest stretched beyond the glass, vast and mysterious, but it no longer felt distant. He raised his coffee cup to his lips, staring out into the early morning mist. For the first time in a long time, he truly felt connected to something bigger than himself. Rachel entered the room, catching his faraway expression. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" she asked softly. Ethan considered the question, a small smile playing at his lips. "Maybe. But even if she doesn't, I'll always be watching. Just in case." As the days passed and life returned to its quiet rhythm, Ethan often found himself looking toward the tree line, waiting. Not with longing, but with understanding. He had learned something profound, not just about Sage and Scout, but about the way nature spoke, in gestures and instincts, in trust and silent calls for help. And he had learned how to listen.